A very good morning, students, and I welcome you to the class of paper 8th B. And as you know, we are doing the famous poem A Background Casually by Nissim Ezekiel. And in our previous two classes, we have come to know about the biography and achievement of this famous Indian English poet. And in the last class, we studied uh, and analyzed uh, the first portion of this poem. And student, in our today's class, we are going to analyze critically the remaining part of this famous poem, Background Casually. Students, in the first section of the poem, we read that poet calls himself in a lighter vein a poet rascal clown, and he recalls his childhood days filled with the sense of fright and failure. And we studied and analyzed how frightened and restless as a child he felt, and how he appeared very lean and thin. Unlike other normal children, he was poor at games, and he remembers and mentions that he couldn't fly a kite. He failed to spin his borrowed top, and he also mourns that as he was a Jew, he had to face numerous difficulties in a Roman Christian school. And he said that he was somewhat ill treated by both the Christians and Hindus in this school. And students, let us first go through the remaining text of the poem. 22, time to go abroad. First the decision, then a friend to pay the fare. Philosophy, poverty, and poetry, three companions shared my basement room. The London seasons passed me by. I lay in bed 2 years alone, and then a woman came to tell my willing ears I was the son of a man. I knew that I had failed in everything, a bitter thought. So, in an English cargo ship, taking French guns and mortar shells to Indochina, scrubbed the decks and learned to laugh again at home. How to feel it home was the point. Some reading had been done, but what had I observed except my own exasperation? All Hindus are like that, my father used to say, when someone talked too loudly or knocked at the door like the devil. They hogged and spat, they sprawled around. I prepared for the worst, married, changed jobs, and saw myself a fool. The song of my experience sung. I knew that all was yet to sing. My ancestors among the castes were aliens crushing seeds for bread. The hooded bullocks made his rounds. One among them fought and taught, a major bearing British arms. He told my father sad stories of the Boer War. I dreamed that fierce man had to bound my feet and hands. The later dreams were all of words. I did not know what words betray, but let the poems come and lost that grip of things the worldly prize. I would not suffer that again. I look about me now and try to formulate a plainer view. The wise survive and serve, to play the fool, to cash in on the inner and outer storm. I have made my commitment now. This is one, to stay where I am, as others choose to give themselves in some remote and backward place. My backward place is where I am. So, student, this was the text that we are going to analyze today, the remaining part of the poem, Background Casually. So, the poet has mentioned that at the age of 22, he went abroad with the help of his friend Ibrahim Al-Qazi, who gave him one-way ticket to in England. He lived in England in a basement room in utter poverty, and he dedicated himself to the study of philosophy and the writing of poetry. So, we have noted that in a very lucid manner he remarks, philosophy, poverty, and poetry, three companions shared my basement room. And student, uh, next he further recalls that his London days. And he says that in London he led a hard and cheerless life without bothering about the happenings around him. And in the poem we find a reference to a woman, and that indicates that there was someone with who the poet fell in love, though it might have ended in failure. The sense of failure makes the poet realize that it was useless to stay in London and thus waste his time. He decided to come back to India. As he had no money, he had to work as a sailor, scrubbing decks and carrying coal on an English ship, taking ammunition to Indochina. While back in India, he had to face the problem of adjustment. How to feel at home was the point. The adjustment with the irritating, noisy people seemed very difficult. In the course of time, he got married and did many odd jobs. He was a drifter in a sense that he, in a sudden shift to the past, the poet remarks that his ancestors belonged to the caste of Telis who used to earn their living by crushing seeds into oil. He recalls the scene of the oil seed crushing machine round which the hooded bullock used to move continually for hours together. And next, we have read that the author, the poet, carries on with the memories of his ancestors from the previous section. The poet recalls how one of his ancestors, a major, used to narrate tragic war stories for the Boer War to his father. Such stories resulted in horrific dreams to the poet. He would dream of wild, strong men who had bound his head, and would dream of wild, strong men who had bound his head and feet. Then he would dream only of words, but at that time he did not know that words, right words, often betray words. And here, students, we find a confessional tone when he says that his earlier poetry is deficient in use of appropriate words and reality. And he recalls his previous resolve that he would not suffer that again. That is, he would wait for appropriate words and have a tight hold on reality. And coming to present, he says that now he tries to have a simple and plain view of life. He makes the best use of his inner passions, longings, and turmoils, as also of the external difficulties and problems life has in store for him. Such inner and outer experiences form the theme of his poetry. And student, as we have seen that in the last two stanzas, the poet makes his commitment clear. He says that whatever be the limitations in the milieu he belongs to, he stands committed to it. He is committed to India and to the city where he lives. Though foreign friends wonder at his plight, he knows that they only exaggerate the difficulties. And in the last stanza, he says that I have made my commitment now. This is one, to stay where I am. As others choose to give themselves in some remote and backward place, my backward place is where I am. So there is no doubt, students, that the poet makes his commitment to the immediate landscape and the country of his choice. And the last line betrays the fact that this commitment does not solve the feeling of rootlessness and helplessness. And one critic has rightly remarked that the line, my backward place is where I am, is a fine line of poetry, singly taken, but it amounts to little more than sulking where it is viewed in the proper context. So, students, we have seen that Ezekiel's attitude throughout his poetry shows his lack of root in the culture and mythological past of the country he commits himself to. So, students, today this beautiful poem comes to an end. We will continue with more poetry in our coming classes. Thank you very much.